Welcome to Grounded with John Tester and Maritza Giorgio. We are just going to jump right into the meat of this special episode, all about campaign finance and the impacts of that Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court in 2010. It's something that's been very meaningful to you, Senator.
Yeah, look, we're gonna have a good conversation today about maybe one of the poorest decisions the Supreme Court's ever made, in my opinion. Uh, it's um, it's kind of corrupted the whole system, quite frankly, and our democracy. And I would like to think that if they had to do over again, they would change that decision, but who knows? But we have Tiffany Muller. Is now the time to introduce her?
Yeah,
Maria, yeah.
please go
So we
ahead.
have Tiffany Muller, who is a big deal. She's the head of End Citizens United, and this group, I would call it a grassroots group because they've got members all over the country. Goal is what their name implies, and that is to end Citizens United, to take us back to the good old days when corporations weren't people and there was transparency and the money that was coming into campaigns, and that we weren't seeing gazillions of dollars being spent both digitally and on TV and direct mail and everywhere else on these campaigns. So we'll get to that in a second, but I want to start with welcoming Tiffany Tiffany
Tiffy.
Muller. Tiffany Muller. No, don't call her Tiffy. She'll hit you if you call her Tiffy. I want to welcome Tiffany Muller. So it's good to have you on, Tiffany.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here with both of you, Senator and Maritza. I am such a fan of your podcast and just such a fan of everything you both are doing. And it's great to be here today. And the only person who ever got to call me Tiffy was my grandmother, who was
Yeah.
my favorite person in the entire world. And Senator, I adore you, but we still got some work to do before you hit that level.
Yeah, I got it. And don't worry. Don't worry, Tiffany. You will be Tiffany. So look, I'm going to start out by saying yesterday I was on a Zoom with another organization, and they asked a really important question that I hopefully you can shed some light on, Tiffany. They said, obviously, the Citizens United decision was a bad decision, and why hasn't anybody done anything about it? In particular, Congress. Why hasn't Congress done anything about it? Because you can say what you want, but I guarantee you, people are not happy with the kind of ads and the number of ads and elections that never stop now. It's 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. The only people that might be happy are people in the digital space and the TV space. But why hasn't something been done by now? Because it does seem pretty obvious, and I think it was a good question because it seems pretty obvious to you and it seems pretty obvious to me, but obviously it's not obvious to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this decision works really well for the people in power, and they actually want more money into the system to stay in power. But for everybody else across the country, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, it really doesn't matter. I think everyone else across the country knows that the sheer amount of money in politics is gumming up our system, causing dysfunction, making it to where we can't address any of the big pressing priorities that we all have as a country. So, look, number one, overturning Citizens United is really hard. We need to either have the Supreme Court overturn itself or we need a constitutional amendment. And that is really hard in these current times. But there's a lot that Congress could do tomorrow if it just wanted to. And, right after the Citizens United decision in 2010, there were actually efforts to make sure that all of the money spent in elections was fully disclosed and transparent and called the Disclose Act. And that's something that could pass tomorrow. We were one vote short in 2011, I believe it was. It might have been 2012 when that came up for a vote. And I know you helped push that effort. But every single time it's come up, it's been filibustered, it's been blocked. And so, look, I think sometimes on both sides of the aisle, there's this idea that we can just take in more money and it'll be okay. But what we're really seeing is the American people being drowned out, their voices aren't being heard, And it's really the people with the biggest checkbooks who are getting to have the biggest say. And that's not how our democracy is supposed to work.
Amen to that, sister. It also, not to add on before we get to Maritza's question, because she always has a lot more questions than I do. But it also causes a paralysis in Congress where
Mm-hmm.
they can't do anything because, there may be one or two corporations that basically funded their campaign, and they're certainly not going to do something that would go against them. And so they've got their ear and they move forward. But the Disclose Act would have been a great step forward. We'll get into some of those other bills that could be great steps forward in a second. But I know Maritza is chomping at the bit to ask a question.
Well, I mean, I have so many questions that I could pull off of from that. I'd like to go back to kind of the beginning and to explain the case. If it's one of those things I think people hear a lot about it, and maybe they don't know a lot of details about it. But I also, one thing that I hear every single cycle, Senator, you'll have to remind me, how much was your campaign last cycle?
It was north of 275 million.
So I have people ask me all the time, how can we be cutting this or cutting that or not having money for this when this kind of money is being spent just on ads, just on campaigns, and for sometimes, sorry, Senator, a failed campaign? That money's spent, and yeah, I know, I'm sorry. And you can all
You're
right,
killing me.
I'm gonna do it to me too though now, because you can say that, the digital space and the TV space, well, they might be happy about it, but I still got laid off. People are getting laid off in media all over the country. So there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there, but we can kind of get into the actual money. But let's go back to the beginning and explain kind of the catalyst for this and this decision that launched this End Citizens United.
Yeah, and I think that in our country there's always been this real push and pull between the people demanding power and representation in our government and the wealthiest and the biggest industries trying to consolidate power and money for themselves. And we saw it in the Gilded Age. We saw it there in Montana with the Copper Kings. I always love talking about the Montana history around this. So we've seen that kind of push and pull throughout our history. And the Citizens United case, it really took two really terrible ideas and it merged them together. What it said was money equals speech, which had been there had been previous court rulings that had said that, right? And then it said corporations are people. And it basically then merged those two ideas and it said, look, corporations, organizations, wealthy individuals can spend unlimited amounts of money in our campaigns to affect our campaigns. And it really ended up opening up this floodgate of unlimited and undisclosed money. And so, in 2006, Senator, I think you talk about that your first campaign was what, $27 million or something like that.
That's correct.
And in 2024, it's $275 million, 10 times more for basically the same amount of voters. And that's because of the Citizens United decision. But what we've also seen then is just to the senator's point, the gridlock, the dysfunction, the paralysis that comes not just because of the money spent, but the threat of money being spent. So I'll give you an example. After Citizens United, the oil and gas industry became the number one spenders in our elections. And prior to Citizens United, there had been about 14 instances of Senate Republicans joining with Senate Democrats to try to address the impacts of climate change, something that farmers know quite a bit about, right? And we were one vote from passing cap and trade. It wouldn't have been perfect, but it would have been something. And then after Citizens United, the mere threat of these industries coming in and spending a ton of money actually kept everyone and kept the Senate Republicans from actually being able to address that at all. So that's what we've seen over the years is the paralysis and the gridlock and dysfunction coming from it. But that's really what the court did. It just put a free for all sign on our elections and said, if you have the most money, you can have the most influence.
Can you talk a little bit about uh, the bar to repeal Citizens United? It's a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
And then after you talk about where that bar is and why it's so difficult to repeal it, talk about some of the other things that could be done to give more transparency in elections to make Congress more functional.
Well, so first of all, we either need the Supreme Court to overturn itself, which, as we know, isn't, we're a long way from that. I always like to say that we were a Merrick Garland from having it, right? But then with the addition of Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, we are further from a Supreme Court that would be willing to relook at this case than we've been in quite some time. But look, we need the right people in office who will help make sure that we get the right justices on the court. We need reform on the court. The fact that you have billionaires buying lavish vacations for Supreme Court justices is ridiculous. And so we need ethics reform on the Supreme Court as well. So that's one avenue. The other avenue is a constitutional amendment. And man, those are hard, right? It is, you have to have 2/3 of the House and Senate and 3/4 of the states ratifying. And I actually think the states part of that is easy because about 75 or 80% of Americans want to see this overturned. It is actually in Congress that it's hard because right now these are partisan issues. They shouldn't be. They didn't used to be, but right now they are. So what can we do? Well, there's a lot we could do right now with the right people in office. We can pass bills that actually begin to root out this corruption and this money. First and foremost, we should know where all this money is coming from. So we need strong disclosure and transparency laws. Montana's got some of the best in the country. We have other states like Colorado that have put in place disclosure and transparency laws so that we actually know who is trying to influence elections. That seems really simple, but let me tell you, prior to Citizens United, we could trace back about 75% of the money being spent in our elections to who gave it. Now, about 75% of the money being spent in elections, you can't fully trace back where it's coming from. That's mind boggling, right? And dark money, right? This is undisclosed money. In your first race, Senator, in that election cycle, dark money total, not in your race, obviously, was about $5 million. In 2024, it was $1 billion, right? And so this is the way that foreign money is getting in. It's the way corporate money can get in. It's the way that billionaires can hide who they're supporting. So that's number one, disclosure and transparency. Number two, we could get a cop on the beat. The Federal Elections Commission right now isn't even meeting because it doesn't have a quorum because Donald Trump gutted the agency, right? We could actually reform the Federal Elections Commission so it actually enforced campaign finance law. Number three, we could incentivize folks to raise money from everyday Americans at $10 or $15 at a time instead of just going after the big money. There's a lot of other pieces we could do.
What would that look like? What would incentivizing look like?
So lots of places have this. New York has it, Colorado has it, Seattle has it. There are different ways, but it's basically a lot of times it's a matching system where if you are raising money from small dollar donors within your state, there is matching incentives. And the way you fund it is by, a little surcharge on corporations that are breaking the law and being fined anyway, right? This doesn't have to come from general taxpayer monies. There's lots of ways to do this. And I just think we have to be creative and do things differently if we're going to get a different outcome.
Now you think about what Tiffany just said. We're talking about incentivizing people to raise money within their own state. I mean, who has a bigger stake in elections of a U.S. senator or a House member than people within that state? I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I've got to be honest with you. We love people from all over parts of the country, but they don't have a stake in a state like mine or a state like yours, Tiffany, or should I say Maritza's former residence of Minnesota. So I mean, so they don't have a real stake in it. So they're looking at it from a real, you know, single issue kind of situation. So
But
that's
they
really
do in
important.
in a
So
sense, and I think like this is where the national media and the 24-hour news cycle comes in, and just the inundation of information. Because how many times did I hear your name, Senator, on a national broadcast because you were one of these people who were going to decide the power in the Senate? You were one
yeah,
of, and so people suddenly cared about a John Tester race.
yeah. I mean that's true. I would like to think that they've always cared about my races and reasons for them. You're hitting me hard. I mean,
Sorry, I have one more tough question though about transparency. And this maybe will frame me as a cynic, but do we, getting transparency to know where money's coming, I think that's great. But do we think that people care anymore when they're literally saying we want more Elon Musk? We want more Elon Musk in our government when people are supporting that?
I think they're saying we don't want Elon Musk. I mean, he spent $20 million to try to buy a Wisconsin Supreme Court race and was literally auctioning off votes for $1 million apiece. And he got his ass kicked, right? Like we won that race by what, 9 or 10 points. And in the past years, it had been a toss-up race decided by about a point either way. And the outrage to Elon Musk got so much that he's not even in government anymore. Now he's saying he might not even fund political campaigns. I'm not holding my breath. We all know we can't believe anything he says, but I think that the people have been quite clear about what they want. Look, here's what we've seen in states that have done this. First of all, disclosure and transparency is key to rooting out corruption. But the other thing is that some of these donors and some of these corporations don't want to spend the money if you're going to know who they are, right? And so in Montana, for instance, there's this great film about Montana called Dark Money. Uh, and it actually talks about the fact that these outside groups, including the Koch brothers, came in to try to buy the state legislature because they wanted, more drilling and to sell off public lands and things like that. And when the disclosure and transparency laws that Montana put into place went into effect, those folks pulled out of those races, right? They were like, we don't want to fund them if you're going to know who it is. So it does make a difference. I think people are very concerned about corruption. I think we've seen that over the years. I know that's sometimes hard to imagine with the fact that they also put Trump back in office. So I get that dissonance. But I think that actually being able to trace back that money is a really important part of the efforts that we need.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why President Trump got elected president. I still think that if there's one thing that people don't like, it's the amount of money that's going into these elections. I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, or independent, as you said earlier. Nobody came up to me during the last campaign and said, "God, could you buy some more ads? There's just not enough. There's just not enough ads on TV or on the digital side of things. People are sick of it, and they're sick. It doesn't matter what party you belong to. They're sick of it in a very bipartisan way. Let's just put it that way.
That
So
is a good point. And I mean, maybe some of the station groups wanted you to buy more ads, but I do have a question. I mean, is there some bipartisan support on this? That's the first question. We'll start there and then we'll go into some of these state issues. But is there any bipartisan support for this kind of movement?
So there used to be, and almost all the reforms that we've passed throughout the years, whether it was the anti-corruption oh my goodness, reforms after Watergate, or the creation of the FEC, or the McCain-Feingold Act in 2002. Those were all bipartisan efforts, right? And as a matter of fact, what you often saw was kind of leadership of both parties trying to block it because they wanted to keep money in the system. In more recent years, it has become more partisan, with Democrats pushing for reforms and Republicans blocking it. But when we've seen things go on the ballot, we see them pass with 70, 80% support. So we know that the people, again, these are not partisan among the electorate. It is only partisan in the halls of the Capitol. And so, Josh Hawley introduced a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. He's also pushing for a stock trading ban. There's been occasionally one or two members of the House Republican caucus who have been supportive, not enough to really have a real bipartisan effort on most of the big reforms. But on some of the reforms, we have seen bipartisan support. Stock trading ban, online disclosure, some of those pieces we've seen more bipartisan support. But Senator, I don't know what you heard in the caucus. I'm sure that you all talked about this too, how the actual Republican members don't like how much they have to raise money, but yet they're still beholden to this system.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's mixed emotions about it. There's a lot of people, as you well know, that are making a living off of the Citizens United decision, and they don't want to see their jobs go away. I hate to make it that way, but it's true. But if there's the infrastructure that's being built off of this, I was told in Montana, for example, and I think this is true in other states, that the TV stations were running 2 year budgets based because the campaign money coming in was so much that's what they had to do to keep it done. When after the first campaign, this was the first campaign when 27 million, a measly 27 million was spent, which is a lot of damn money. I was at a rural radio station that had just swapped out their electronics and they were doing well. And I said, geez, you guys must have, you must be doing pretty well. And he said, yeah, thank you. It was because of the previous election cycle. Now, I like creating jobs in rural America, truthfully. I mean, that's a fun thing, but this is the wrong way to do it. It just is the wrong way to do it.
I just remember every time I would write anything about campaign, raising and spending, it was always, this is the most
Mm-hmm.
expensive insert race here to date in Montana history. And you could just count on that. You could just count on it going up and up and up every cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, go ahead.
No, go, no, you first, Tiffany. They listen to me
Uh,
all the time, and so you go.
No, I think that I think the skyrocketing amount, it's so much money, it's hard to wrap your brain around too, right? Like it was $20 billion in 2024. As you said, Maritza, we could do so much with that money. We're arguing about those kind of amounts in the big bullshit bill right now, right? So we could actually go help people create good jobs, get rural broadband, I don't know, feed hungry children. We could do so much with that money instead of just pouring it all into campaigns. I think the other thing is, I think we often dismiss that voters understand what all this campaign money is actually doing to them and how much it's harming them. But honestly, they get it. I travel the country a lot. I talk to people all across the country. We talk to voters who voted for Trump and voters who voted for Harris. And basically what they all feel is like nobody cares about me, right? I don't have $5,000 to go get a lunch with a member of Congress. One guy I even said to us, look, shit rolls downhill and I'm at the bottom, right? And he just feels like so many people feel they're working harder and harder, but prescription drug prices stay high so that big pharma can keep making record profits. Jobs are harder to come by. Corporations keep screwing them. Grocery prices are going up, and they just feel like nobody cares about them. And that is directly connected to this issue of money in politics.
So there's this thing in Montana that Senator Tester has voiced his support for, and former Governor Mark Roscoe. It's called the Transparent Election Initiative. So basically, a state constitutional amendment. It would just say corporations cannot make big political campaign donations, and the way they're doing that is through, I think, the Commerce Department. To say, this is how we can control how corporations operate in the state of Montana. So, do you think those kinds of moves more locally can move the needle on this nationally?
Yeah, and we also support this effort, and it's so. it's such an interesting effort too. I think this is one of the things I was saying earlier. We have to be creative. We have to try new things. And this idea of challenging corporate powers within a state is really a fascinating way to come at it, right? And it's going to piss some people off because it's not going to only impact these big for-profit corporations. It's going to also impact some of the folks who spend a lot of time and money in campaigns. And I think that's okay, right? I expect that the voters of Montana will love this. I think it'll end up being challenged in court, but there is no reason that it shouldn't be upheld. That doesn't mean it will be. We all know how the courts can be sometimes, but I think it's a really creative way to try to address what we're seeing. In Maine, we saw a ballot measure pass that tries to limit the amounts that can be given and spent by super PACs, which is another kind of really creative measure that's going on. In Arizona, we saw a very comprehensive disclosure ballot measure pass. So again, when people are asked about this, they want the big reforms. They want the money out, and we just have to figure out the ways to give it to them. So I'm really excited about this Montana effort. I think it's awesome.
So you're just a regular person now, Tiffany. Don't You're not the head of End Citizens United. You're just a regular person. How do you influence the
That's going to be
system?
hard.
No, 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 no. I know you. It'll work out just fine. How do you influence the system? How do you get this issue on people's radars if you're just Joe Public and you're concerned about it and you want to try to make a difference?
I feel like you all have this conversation on just about every episode because I think what we're hearing is how do I make a difference in this country? How do I, when things feel so dark and when things feel so chaotic, how can I make a difference? And look, we need everyone to keep speaking up. We need people to speak out. We need people calling in Montana, calling Steve Daines and Sheehy and saying, look, we demand that you get some of this money out of politics. Again, these are not partisan issues with the electorate. So people should be calling and raising their voice and having it heard. Write letters to the editor, talk to your family and friends, and find out where people stand on it. And because what we need people who really believe in reform to be in these positions of power to then make a difference and pass meaningful legislation. And so educate yourself. Come join us at End Citizens United, please. We are a grassroots movement of 4 million people across the country joining together to stand up against the big money. So come join us, and we're happy to direct your efforts into ways to make a difference. But mostly it's keep standing up, speaking out, making those phone calls, and talking to your friends and family.
I do think there is so much confusion too about how this whole thing works. I mean, Senator, you're going to get a chuckle out of this. I know you probably know this happens, but so many people think that you pocketed that $200 million dollars and you're just living on it. They don't get it. Like, they don't get the rules around the money that's raised and how it needs to be spent and all of these rules and regulations. And that's one thing. But second, I think breaking it down into really simple information like, hey, you know how you tell me you don't watch the news during the campaign season because you can't stand the ads? Well, this is how you know, get to watch ads for your local hardware store again during the campaign cycle.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Marisa, and Tiffany, you can add on to this. But I mean, the corruption isn't money going into the elected official's pocket. The corruption is happens when policies that make perfect sense aren't enacted because money was infused into the equation. And that's where I see the corruption. I see, I see other forms of corruption which may or may not have anything to do with campaign finance, like a $400 million jet from Qatar, or selling Teslas on the lawn of the White House. But the bottom line is that Tiffany talked about climate change. You can go down the list. I mean, there are so many things that could be done that would help regular folks in this country that aren't done because of the influences of big money in our elections. And I think that's where the corruption is.
So here's a question. Would we have a President Trump without this Supreme Court decision?
Absolutely not. No, I firmly believe we wouldn't. I mean, Elon Musk spent $300 million and basically propped up some really critical parts of the campaign, including the entire field operation in this last election. And I think without that kind of outside support, without that kind of really big money, I don't believe that he would be president. I also think like that's what we're seeing is we're now 15 years from the decision. This corruption, this money, the blatancy, I don't even know that that's a word, but I don't know what word to use, that we're seeing is the culmination of 15 years under Citizens United, right? And so I believe that if we had limits and disclosure and common sense campaign finance laws and a watchdog on the beat that could enforce the laws, I don't believe you could have his kind of corruption running amok over our system.
Blatancy is a word. I looked it
So, thank you. I was like, I don't know. I'm going with it.
It's a podcast. You know, we say stupid stuff all the time, but that is a word.
No, I was just going to go with it.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think that I really appreciate this conversation. Senator, is there anything you want to make sure we add to it?
No, other than the fact that it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, it really doesn't have to be this way. I've had plenty of people when I was in the U.S. Senate that came up and said, they're spending too much money on elections. But never did I ever, in a public forum, have somebody stand up and say, where do you stand on Citizens United? And I think that's important, which brings up another point, by the way. The reason you've got elected officials that don't do town hall meetings anymore and they don't talk to the press unless they give them the questions they want answered is because of Citizens United. They don't need the press anymore. They can buy all the ads on TV. They don't need to do town hall meetings because they can influence you through buying ads and those sort of things. So it also it does take away from people's ability to have direct contact, eyeball to eyeball contact, I call it, with their elected officials. So if I was going to say, here are the things that are bad about Citizens United, we've covered most of them. But here's the things that are good about it. I think maybe the only good thing about it is it's making some people rich that wouldn't otherwise be rich, if that's a good thing. I mean, that's it. Otherwise, no good.
What is Tiffany, do you have like an elevator pitch, elevator fact that shocks most people? Like what is there
Oh,
one thing that you say to people that blows them away?
I mean, I think the sheer scale and amount of money, right? Like taking a Montana example and talking about the fact that the sheer amount of spending has increased 10 times shocks most people. But there are also such big amounts that it's hard to wrap your brain around, right? So I think that the connecting it back to people's everyday lives is what I find to be most effective, right? So people really feel the struggle about like prescription drug prices going up, right? And when you talk to them about the fact that in bills where we were supposed to be negotiating prescription drug prices coming down, Big Pharma put in hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that didn't happen. They really get that. Or when Big Pharma was trying to get the insulin cap removed to where you couldn't get insulin for $35 anymore. Thankfully, that didn't pass, but people really understand that. And that's what I find is that sometimes you have to, this can feel esoteric. So you sometimes have to connect it back to people's day to day lives and how it's impacting them. And the thing is it impacts every single issue that they care about, right? Whether it's grocery prices or housing prices or prescription drugs or climate change or public lands. It is all of it. And then I think the other thing that I hear the most is this sense of, yes, this is awful. Yes, we want it out. I have no hope, right? The cynicism of just like, I don't know what to do. But I think this country has tremendous ability to change. And I believe that the people are with us. And the only thing more powerful than the money in politics is the people standing together. And I think we've seen that. We saw that, in Wisconsin, that Wisconsin Supreme Court race where Musk tried to go in and buy it. The big money doesn't always win because people don't like a big bully coming in and just writing a big check. They want to believe that they still have power in their own democracy, and they do. And so I also try to leave them with some hope. I couldn't do this job if I didn't have hope that it could actually change.
I think it will change. I think it has to change. It's just going to take a few more fired up people. So
Before we wrap up, do you have any embarrassing John Tester stories for us?
Oh,
now,
there's nothing.
listen, Tiffany. I won't. I'm gonna use your grandmother's name. Don't say it.
Tiffy.
Don't bring up the issue in Denver, Colorado. Don't bring that one up. Okay.
Don't bring that one up. I was going to bring up. I was going to bring up the one in New York, and
This is gonna be a bonus future episode. Embarrassing John Tester story.
God only knows.
I'll tell one where he won't even get in trouble for it because half of them he will get in trouble for sure. But one of the best things about traveling with John Tester and doing meetings with John Tester is when he is done, he is done. And so he will just like stop talking, stand up, and like walk away. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess we're wrapped up now. Thank you.
Yep. Same on the phone, like, okay, bye.
And in that vein, see you guys later. Gotta go. Bye-bye.
Bye, Senator. Thank you, Tiffany, for joining us. And we appreciate all of your time. And you can go find out more information at endcitizensunited.org. Did I get that right?
You did. You did. Please come join us. And thank you for having me on today. This was great.
Okay, thanks for listening, folks. We'll be back in a few days.